So as we said before, bodhicitta has two aspects, as do all aspects of the path, is the skillful means and the wisdom. And so in other words, the thing we're doing, the technique, and the wisdom that is imbued with, and the wisdom that the technique is actually pointing us to. So, what is all this business about cultivating this heart and cultivating this equality of all beings? Well, really what we're doing is we're beginning to break down this barrier between self and other, which is the root of ignorance, which is the root of non-wisdom. The opposite of that is seeing the indivisibility of self and other on this very profound level, and coming into an experience of being that is not chunked up into these little boxes of people and self and other, so where we're living in this, primordial expanse. And so the practices we're doing are really meaningful and beautiful on a relative level, but they're also a skillful means to bring us into an awareness of the ultimate. And so all of these practices are essentially shifting our view from one where we cherish ourself over all beings to one where we begin to cherish others just as much as ourselves, and even, as the great bodhisattvas do, cherish others more than ourselves. And again, think about this, as we care more about the well-being of others, as we attend more to another being's well-being, our attention comes off of ourself and our self-clinging. And so that act, that skillful means of being more concerned about others' well-being, actually then creates for us a deep sense of freedom, because we're no longer so preoccupied with our little self. So again, it's a skillful means that is at once meaningful on the relative level and bringing us into this deeper wisdom. And so all of these practices are practices of shifting this orientation of how we relate to self and other. And so one of the most profound practices that we can engage in is this practice connected with these other ones. It's a combination of loving kindness and compassion. So where basically we are sending loving kindness, and then we are taking away the suffering. So we're exhaling loving kindness, and we're inhaling the suffering of all beings. And this is a very daunting practice. And we can only do it if we understand that what we are bringing that suffering into is not a limited being, but we are bringing that suffering into the very light of awareness itself. And in that light of awareness, all suffering is totally released. And so this is a very profound practice, which again, as we do this, again, what are we working with? We're working on breaking down this sense of the inherently existent I and this clinging to the I. Because we're literally giving away all of our virtue, all of our goodness, and we're taking on the suffering of all other beings. And so we can't do that. If we're clinging to a self while we do that, then that self will feel like it's getting hurt. But if we're expanding and we're doing this meditation from a place of our Buddha nature, from a place of our primordial awareness, then the suffering of the entire world is like a drop in the ocean of this primordial loving awareness. So to bring us towards this practice of giving and taking can really deepen our understanding and our experience of this indivisibility of self and other. So one way to engage in this is that we send out the loving kindness on the exhale as white light. And then on the inhale, we bring in the suffering of beings. And when it comes to sort of where we think of our self being, it's almost like there's this self bubble, and the black smoke that we're inhaling in as the suffering, it pops this bubble. It pops this self-centered bubble. And it's like when two things hit each other and then both of them are destroyed. So both the black smoke, both the suffering and the self-clinging bubble are both destroyed in that moment. Okay? Does that make sense? So we're at, neither one survives this impact. Okay? So that's one way of doing it, and it's important to do that so that you're not just bringing in this suffering into a real sense of you being there. Another way of doing that, or another way of looking at that, is seeing this orb of light at your heart, which expands and expands, and that is your primordial nature. And as the suffering comes into that, it is simply dissolved into that completely. So again, it's this dissolution of the self-clinging and the dissolution of the suffering of all beings. And so there are many versions of this that we can do, but those are two very potent ones that we can begin with. And this can be a scary practice to engage in, and because it makes us feel maybe perhaps somewhat vulnerable. And usually we hear these practices where we're actually bringing in light, and we're bringing in healing, and that's beautiful as well. But what we're identifying in this practice is that the source of disease, dis-ease, is actually this self-clinging, and that is what's caused all of our problems. And so this practice is actually dissolving that, and so therefore it is actually a healing practice. So that is one of the sort of foundational bodhicitta practices, because you are so clearly in this practice working with, on the one hand, the expansive heart, but you're also really working with wisdom here, right? And so you're really engaging in the path of realization. And so this is where now we get into engaging bodhicitta. And this is where we're actually setting out on the path of meditation to achieve enlightenment. And so this meditation that we just talked about is certainly one of them. But the two fundamental practices that we engage in on the bodhisattva path, which is the path that unfolds after this vow that we take to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, or at least the aspiration, and we can begin the practice and see if by doing the practice we gain deeper and deeper faith and deeper courage, and our aspiration expands. So on the one hand we have the shamatha, which we talked about before, this calm abiding, this ever deepening focusing and balancing of the mind, such that we have this really strong instrument to then investigate on the other pillar of meditation, investigate the nature of our mind and the nature of reality. And it is through this investigation that we come to wisdom, which is that which liberates. So these are the two foundations, and then all of these other practices that we've talked about in terms of the heart practices are complementary to them, or in the case of this giving of loving kindness and taking of suffering, is also, it's both at the same time. It's a wisdom practice, and it's also a concentration practice, and it's also a heart practice. It's kind of all of them in one. But basically, this is what we can break the path down into, and this is a path of investigation, of discovery, and we proceed along this path by developing ever deeper samadhi, ever deeper concentration, and ever deeper insight. And so the meditations that we'll do after this will be primarily focused on those practices. And we just keep going in those practices, and they can be very meaningful. And then lastly, and again, this is just a brief overview, but it's a way to bring us into the practice, and then if we're interested, we can go deeper and read more and go and receive more teachings. But on this path so far, we've been talking about, this is sort of what's referred to in the Buddhist tradition as the causal vehicle. So we're going to engage in these various practices and eventually discover and awaken our Buddha nature and become enlightened. And on the other hand, we've also talked about the immediate awakening of and this is called the fruitional path, where we take the fruition, we take the already perfect Buddha mind, we take already our enlightened mind, and we take that as the path, rather than the relative path. And again, we're doing both of these at the same time, but there are certain practices that we'll do where we engage with that ultimate level. So like when we take refuge in the ultimate rather than the relative level of refuge, this is what we're doing. We are taking refuge in the fruition. We are taking the fruition as the path. We're taking our Buddha nature. We're taking the enlightened mind right here and now as the path. And another way to do this is to use visualization. And in the visualization, basically what we're doing is we are calling in, using the skillful means of our imagination, we are bringing in the vision of our highest self. And then we are calling in that energy. We're allowing it to descend into our being. We're filling up with this vision of our highest self, kind of like what we did in the loving kindness meditation, where we're considering what is our vision of our greatest flourishing, what is our highest self, so to speak. And so we are really filling up with this, and we are in a way taking that vision of our highest self as the path. We are by engaging in this visualization, by engaging in this imaginative leap into really believing this is who I really am. And of course, it's not just a like playing cops and robbers or dressing up, because we already know that at the ground of our being is our Buddha nature, our enlightened nature. And so we are just taking an imaginative leap to engage with what we already know is true. Okay? And similarly, with any vision we have for our life, that possibility is already present in the field of potentiality. And so by calling it in and by taking it as the path and by bringing it into our vision, we are engaging in the causes that will ultimately create that vision in our life. Okay? So this is the second type of meditation that we can engage in. And it can be very powerful, and it can be very, very sudden and very immediate. So the other path, the path of shamatha and vipassana, can be very quick. It can be a cut through, but sometimes we need some time to really drop into these practices and to deepen them. And of course, with taking the fruition as the path, bringing this light of the highest being into our body and taking that as the path, the more we do it, the more time we have, the more profound it will be. But it's also something that we can just charge up at any time. So at any time in the day, and especially the beginning of the day, we can call in this higher self. We can bring it down in the form of light into our body. We can come into embodying this vision of our highest self, this vision of ourselves as this enlightened being. And then we can just feel that imaginatively and then live from that space throughout the day and try to maintain this awareness that that is who we really are. And we're using our imagination to bring our minds to what reality actually is. So these are the practices that we'll deal with from here on out. And that's as far as we'll go in this little mini course, this little introduction. So there'll be some more lessons, but it'll all be directed towards meditation now. And so I hope that this has been inspiring. There's so much more to get into. We can always go deeper, but as long as we have some of these practices, we can take this time right now to delve into these practices, to work with the heart in all of these ways we've talked about, the four measurables, the refuge connection, this this higher self visioning, the mindfulness of breathing that we talked about to stabilize our attention, the settling of body, speech, and mind. And then after this, we'll go into more meditations, some more shamatha meditations, some vipassana meditations, some insight meditations, and perhaps some guided meditations on the four measurables. So we have a lot to work with. And again, the main point here being that when this becomes the heartbeat of our life, this practice of purifying our minds and of purifying our being and of serving others and of coming to ever deeper and deeper awakening and well-being and having more capacity to serve, when that's our goal, then circumstances are largely irrelevant, and we always have meaning in our lives, and we always have a path to walk. We always have something to do, even if we're locked in our homes. In fact, sometimes when we're locked in our homes, maybe that's the best time to practice because we have this space now, and we can now learn how to use our minds, how to use this precious human birth. This is what the sages, the enlightened ones, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the Christs, these are the ones, the beings who have come here and taught us how to use our minds, how to use this precious life we have in the most meaningful way. And we can do it right now. We can engage in these practices right now, and we can set out on the path of ever-deepening fulfillment, ever-deepening love, awareness, wisdom, and compassion. And so, please join me on this path. Enjoy your practice. Bring a spirit of joy to it. And I wish you all the very best in your practice. And we'll talk soon in other meditations. Okay? Blessings.